We will review and take action on the superintendent's recommended fiscal year 2025 capital budget and the FY25 through 30 capital improvements program. I would like to thank Mr. Brian Hall, Chief Operating Officer, for sitting in on this meeting today as Dr. McKnight continues to recuperate. Mr. Hall, do you have any opening comments for us as we begin?
Yes, thank you, President Silvestre. Welcome, members of the Board of Education. We are here this evening to act on the superintendent's recommended FY25 capital budget and FY25 through 2030 capital improvements program. The fiscal year 2025 is the first year of the biennial CIP process. In accordance with Montgomery County Charter, all CIP projects are considered in odd-numbered fiscal years. Therefore, this CIP will receive a full review from the county executive and the county council in the coming months. The superintendent's recommendation totals $1.999 billion for the 6-year period, an increase of $93.6 million more than the previously approved CIP. The recommendation includes maintaining the completion dates for all capital projects with the exception of 4 that require extension of their construction schedules, providing additional funds to address budget shortfalls, to have projects remain on their approved schedules, funding for 3 new addition projects, funding for 5 new major capital projects, funding for new countywide initiatives, and funding to increase some of our countywide systemic projects. And we have included in that would be additional money for HVAC replacements and repairs. So the resolution before you tonight outlines the capital and non-capital recommendations for the FY 2025 capital budget and the FY 2025-30 capital improvements program.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Before we take action on the resolution, board members, do you have any comments? Mrs. Madrowski.
Just one, and I feel like it's sort of referred to in two of the whereases, but in reference to some of our major capital projects such as Woodward, Northwood, Crown, and Damascus, with the boundary studies, I did not put together any kind of resolution or amendment to this, but I am asking that we include elementary and middle schools in the feeder patterns when we look at the boundaries, and that if these projects are delayed, that we do everything we can not to delay the beginning of the boundary studies. I think I don't personally, and I know we've talked about this over the years, but understand what the harm is in planning earlier than waiting till it follows the date.
And yep, thank you. So as part of the spring CIP process, we will be bringing 2 additional boundary studies for consideration with the board, and we certainly can have that discussion, about what tiers are included in that. Okay,
so I would have to do a separate resolution essentially for that at a later date in the spring?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
You're asking that elementary school?
I'm asking that when we look at the feeder patterns for these high schools, these 4 high schools, that we also include the middle schools and potentially the elementary schools. I know, when we did this before with, I'm forgetting which school it was. It wasn't Clarksburg. Maybe it was Clarksburg, but whatever the last one was we did, we included the middle schools, and because we included the middle schools, several of the elementary schools were minorly adjusted. But the scope of this boundary study is going to be so large that I just would really like to see us take a broad view of it and include as many of the schools as we can and start as early as possible so people can start to learn to adjust to what potentially would be coming.
Does it not look at middle schools?
So the boundary study scope, so let's say if we give the example of the Woodward one that actually was approved, it was to look at the middle school and the high schools, but not the elementary service area. So for example, if my child goes to school X, the boundary study for Woodward would not have changed my child going to school X elementary school, but could potentially impact the middle school and the high school. I believe that what Ms. Bondrowski is asking or would like to see in the boundary study scopes is that my child's elementary school could change as well as the middle school and high school. And so the only thing that I would say, as Mr. Hull said, is that there is only one approved boundary study right now when we're talking about all of those projects. So the Woodward one, but we still have to look at Crown and Damascus as well. And so what the resolution before you says is that superintendent will take the time over the next few months, and during spring amendments, which start in mid to late February, that a recommendation would come out. At that time, if that recommendation does not support what you're interested in, of course, that is the opportunity to then potentially amend that recommendation.
Okay, I appreciate that. Do you have something you want to say, Elsie? Just because I was going to, I know in the past, or at least my recollection of the past has been when projects get delayed because of funding and whatever, the boundaries studies that we anticipate starting at X date end up getting pushed back as well. And I'm just also requesting that we not do that.
Right, so in this case, again, with Woodward, the reason why it's sort of being will be reconsidered in the springtime is if it stayed on its approved schedule, it would be 2.5 years before Woodward opens. The schedule that we had, based upon the 2026 completion, was 1.5 years opening. A year and a half where the board would act before the school would open. So based upon its schedule now, it was a 2024 decision by the board with a 2026 opening of Woodward. So it was 1.5 years. Right. If it stayed on its schedule now, it would be 2.5 years, which is why the superintendent in the resolution says we will come back to it in spring. Again, you can start it even earlier than what it would be anticipated, but that recommendation will be part of that spring amendment process. And then, of course, the board has an opportunity to have those discussions and put in whatever amendments and make any decisions that they then choose.
Okay, thank you.
I hate to intrude with such a mundane issue, but Madam President, if you could establish a quorum and approve the agenda, just because we're going to take a vote tonight. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I will call on my fellow board members to establish that we have a quorum. Mr. Said.
Hello, Sami Said, and as usual, I'm extremely excited to be here tonight.
Good evening, everyone. Lynn Harris. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm also extremely excited to be here tonight.
Good evening, Rebecca Smondrowski, District 2.
Good evening, Shebra Evans.
Good evening, Brenda Wolf, District 5.
Good evening, Julie Yang, District 3.
Thank you.
Move to approve the agenda.
Second.
All in favor, raise your hands. And that's unanimous with those present. Thank you, Ms.
Is it time for me to move the resolution?
No, I think Mr. Said had.
Oh, sorry.
And then Mrs. Evans.
Just a brief comment. I just want to kind of applaud the work of the school system in addressing so many things that people have been talking about forever. I see major capital projects here for Damascus High School, Eastern Middle School, and a number of elementary schools like Cold Spring, which I know the community's been asking for so long. And so I just kind of want to highlight to students and just to the community that we are, working to do this, even with the challenges that we have faced with the supply chain, with funding, with all of that. We're still really trying to do a lot of these projects, and I just want to applaud the work of the school system for moving a lot of that forward, along with the HVAC replacements that I know so many schools need. So I just want to kind of highlight that and applaud that, as we move forward. While there's always challenges, there are wins here today. So I just want to acknowledge that before we move forward here.
And Mr. Said took the words right out of my mouth. I wanted to say thank you as well. And I also wanted to thank Ms. Karen Mijas for her work. This is her last meeting with us.
What?
So many years with the school. Yeah, we couldn't let this meeting end without saying goodbye and thank you for your many years of service. And I don't know that I'll be playing pickleball, but I'll look out for you, your husband. So just take good care. Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
I want to second that. I didn't realize this was your last meeting with us, and it's been a long journey together, and I very much appreciate everything that you've done over these years. I think it's been at least 15 years we've been working together, if not more, so thank you for all your work. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Carmenijas. We're going to miss you, and I'm sure you'll reinvent yourself with your next stage of your life, but we're very grateful for your service to Montgomery County and all the beautiful projects that you have helped make happen for our students. But before you go away, to follow up on this, Mrs. Modrowski's question about elementary schools, what are the implications of including elementary schools in the boundary studies of this scope?
So it is potentially a very big scope of work, and I know there was some discussion, and I don't remember who actually brought it up, whether or not right now, and that's what the superintendent is going to do over the next couple of months, is it, one boundary study? Is it one giant boundary study? Is it 3 separate boundary studies? Is it, because all 3 are opening at the same exact time, they sort of have to be on the same schedule. There is a little flexibility in that, but again, if you want it as early as possible, so communities, parents know, they basically are going to run on somewhat the same schedule. So the implication is just more involvement, more options, more students being reassigned to different schools. So again, typically, for example, when we did Clarksburg, Northwest, and Seneca Valley, you use the middle school service areas to then populate the high schools. If you are looking down another level, you are basically starting at ground zero. And looking, taking an elementary school service area, and typically when you do middle schools, you take an elementary school service area and then populate that. So basically you're starting at sort of ground zero, taking elementary schools, breaking those up into potential zones, and then you could take those zones, populate a middle school, but then you could take a whole service area and populate a high school. It's just starting, from ground one, impacting potentially more students, because if you think about opening, let's say, Damascus in 2027, you may only have middle school students that would be impacted, because instead of going to one school, they may now be going to another. If you then go down a level, you can have elementary school students going to then a different middle school and then going to a different high school. You could also have current elementary school students changing their elementary school, middle school, and high school.
Just out of curiosity, how many years has it been since we've done a broad overview look at the county boundaries?
So I don't think there was ever, at least to my knowledge, a whole county boundary study, right? So I always differentiate between the boundary analysis, which was information, data, evaluation versus an actual reassignment. I don't know if there has ever been a countywide boundary study. I know that, we had impacts when we did the Northeast Consortium and we opened those high schools. In the Down County Consortium, of course, then it was Clarksburg, Damascus, and Seneca, which was a pretty big boundary study. And that was 3 high schools.
Right.
So this will be something
Similar to that, essentially, if we do all 3 high schools at the same time.
potentially, so it would be 5-fold.
Okay.
5-fold, because instead of having 3, you have the potential of doing 15, I think we said like 15 or 17 to 19, depending again what the scope would be. We sort of have the outlined scope, the approved scope for Woodward, and what those high schools and middle schools were, which ones were included. Then you would have Crown with no scope yet. So we've identified high schools based upon their overutilization, but again, you can include more. And then same thing with Damascus. We have said that Damascus was being expanded for Clarksburg, but again, you can include more high schools in that. So if you include high schools, middle schools, and elementary schools,
I was
I
really.
don't know what the number was.
I was going to say, I was thinking more along the lines of, I just would like to get a better sense of what that would look like if we did include them. So that we could have, we as a board could have an opportunity to make some sort of determination as to what the effects would be on our elementary school and our communities as a whole.
And I think it will be helpful probably once the superintendent makes a recommendation in the spring. And if that is not included and you want that information, that is certainly information staff can provide, that if you wanted all the elementary schools based upon the middle schools and high schools, for example, that may have been recommended if elementary schools aren't already, what would that look like? And that's certainly data that can easily be provided because we know which ones would be impacted.
Right.
Mrs. Mondrowski, is just for efficiency sake, or is there a problem we're trying to solve?
It's for efficiency's sake in terms of starting as soon as possible to let people know, kind of what's coming. This is such a large scope of work that's going to be done. And, we have heard from a lot of families that they would like us to get started on that as sooner than later. It also gives us a lot more time to get public feedback and put out communications. But in terms of looking at the potential to include elementary schools, in part, I'm trying to look at minimizing split articulation schools as much as possible. I'm trying to look at making sure that we're continuing to maximize our walking abilities, our walkers' abilities, and address as many capacity issues as we possibly can, because we do have some elementary schools that are underutilized versus some that are overutilized. And we're doing all of this to address capacity. I'd like us to try and address capacity as.
Thank you. Okay, Ms. Harris.
Yeah, and I just building on the conversation a bit, I do have, as I've said before, some interest in looking at, I think if you look, at 25 clusters and you look at our elementary schools in each cluster, it's in the elementary schools that we really do see the pretty dramatic, sometimes capacity imbalances. And, that's just not if we talk about operational excellence, that's just not a good use of resources. When we have, 300, we have elementary schools that are only half occupied. And then nearby we have a school that has, relocatables. So it's kind of one of my interests as well, is looking at, are there some common sense, relatively simple steps we could take to realign that so we are more operationally efficient, which means we're more fiscally efficient.
All right, if there are no other comments, does one of the board members have the green sheet, the resolution? Do you have it, Mrs. Mondrowski?
I move the resolution for the superintendent's recommended fiscal year 2025 capital budget and the fiscal year 2025 through 2030 capital improvements program.
Second.
All in favor, raise your hands. And that's unanimous. Okay.
Short for your last meeting.
I
move adjournment.
We are adjourned.
We don't have to move to adjourn? I move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, raise your hands. And that's unanimous.
And now you're officially done.